While all educators realize the importance of assessment, there is debate over the usefulness of MCAS. Some believe it assesses what children ought to be learning, but others feel it is an added measure that controls curriculum and takes away from instructional time.
I know the fourth grade spends an awful lot of time getting ready for the long composition, and it was that long composition that 34 students in this school, because there are 2 fifth grades, took, and only 1 was advanced. And I dare you to look at the writings that they write, because they write research papers that are 5, 6, 7 pages long that I wasn't required to write until I was in middle school or beyond. So, I mean, I have proof every day of how well they can write. So for them to only find 1 advanced student in this group that scored at the 99th percentile on a standardized test, there's something not wrong right there, and you can tell.
Especially for young children in 3rd and 4th grade who are acutely aware of the fact that they're not measuring up yet, who are working full steam to get there, to have them endure tests that are really inappropriate to their level of performance is so it's kind of a waste of their time. We already know where they're functioning. It's not useful assessment, and it's tremendously anxiety producing.
You'll walk by and you'll see a kid who's got a question in front of him that could not have been a worse matchup for a question and kid, and that he hasn't written a word, and you really, really feel like crying. Because if he'd gotten any of the other 6 or 7 versions, he would have been able to answer them. But that particular version had a word that just stymied him, if he's not a strong reader, or doesn't have a really, advanced vocabulary. And that really makes you feel very sad. I feel sad when kids come up against that kind of experience. I never want them to have that sense of failure about something, and especially about something that I consider unimportant. In fact, I think it gets in the way of learning. So please quote me on that.
Okay.
I think that we are capable of designing tests that enable students to utilize prior knowledge and interest level and motivation so that we can truly test the upper range of their skills and abilities, as opposed to giving a child a reading passage that is crushingly boring for who they are and what they want to do, and they have no prior knowledge. They don't want to read this thing, which tends to test their lower end of their knowledge.
But for some of our special ed kids who may get frozen a little bit when there's pressure and may be much more anxious than a typical kid, to say we're going to time them to see how many words per minute to see if they've met their goal, it's an outrageous way to measure the kind of growth. And we do our best to not make that the feature of our program, but it can't help but be that some of these standards are artificial ones that really de-emphasize what's important with what we're actually doing in our educational programs, and I think kids feel that, unfortunately.
We are not taking into account anymore the developmental growth of education for lots of kids.
I have to do assessments, and even our special ed team will do assessments on how they're coming along with that letter knowledge and sound knowledge and number knowledge, and it just feels to me that if children got that extra year, just give them that extra 12 months, that those kind of things will come so naturally and more readily. Whereas now, some of the children are ready for it, some of them are eager beavers for it, but there are others whom I think developmentally it's inappropriate to be forcing this on, and knowing that they're going to be in an uncomfortable assessment situation. Even if it's me, who they know well, by even assessing it, it's implied that they ought to be knowing it by now.
And some of the subjects are don't seem appropriate for a 5th grader. So, for example, there's the expectation that kids study the changes in voting rights. So from the beginning of the U.S. to the present, more and more parts of the population have been allowed to vote. And you can kind of follow a timeline in terms of when women got the vote, and African Americans, and then they want students to be able to compare that with the changes in voting rights in Russia and in France over the same time period.
Another year, they were asked such specific questions about colonial America that I dare you to try to answer this question. please explain the bicameral nature of the House of Burgesses and its and the ways in which it imitated the House of Commons and Parliament in England. I took that question to the head of the Social Studies Department in Greenfield, and he said, my AP kids could not answer that question. Well, I knew the answer because I was raised in Virginia and North Carolina. I knew the House of Burgesses was very elitist, and it was like the House of Lords, and so I could have said, and I knew what bicameral meant. Fifth graders don't know bicameral. So even the questions don't use the vocabulary of the students.
I have a very good program, but it's stuff I would have thought first and second graders would have been working on, it, counting money and things. And I think that just that much play that is work. When I was in college, they totally said that in early childhood, a child's play is their work, and they were constantly developing motor and language and number sense and all of those things through play. And I agree with that 100%.